welcome to Make an FX. You've clicked on this video probably because you've searched for a way to make a mileometer, then odometer, something old-fashioned spinning counter, or something similar. There's a couple of ways to do this, but fundamentally it boils down to using a precomp with all the numbers, letters, or words, and then using an expression to move each column by the desired amount. This video is in 3 parts, 3 chapters. I'm not going to make you wait for part 2. After the setup, I'll show you a basic counter. This will do for most situations, but after that, I'll show a more realistic counter where the tens and hundreds jump to their next value. And finally, in either case, we need to make it look 3D-ish. Fortunately, YouTube has chapter skipping, so use those if you wish, unless you're watching this in like 2035 when they've been deprecated, in which case just use AI or something. First thing we need to do is create a precomp with dimensions where the width and height both match the width of your final comp. Doesn't matter if you don't fill it, but a square comp makes it much easier to see what's going on. First, let's create a background by double-clicking on the rectangle tool. That creates a shape layer the size of the comp. Expand rectangle on the timeline, delete the stroke, and before we change the color, expand rectangle path 1. Check the link symbol and drop the first value, which is the width, down to 500, maybe 400. And then click on the tiny Add menu and choose Repeater. Expand the new Repeater section on the timeline and expand its transform and set position X's value to 410. So we have 3 copies now spread out horizontally. Then expand the other transform and set the position's X value to 140 and increase the repeater copies to 5. So you should have 5 rectangles all filling the screen with a tiny gap in between. Go ahead and set fill to a really dark grey. I went with 17, 17, 17. And then let's hit enter on the layer and rename this to background. And then go to layer, layer styles, bevel and emboss. So we get a nice little bit of shading. But the reason I'm using a shape layer for all this is so that if you have to adjust it later, you only have a few values to change to get it right. Speaking of which, let's hide the top bevel by going back to rectangle path 1 and increasing the height so it is off screen. Next, to give it a bit of a metal texture, I'd grab this weathered metal image. I think it might come from Video Copilot actually, but anything will do. And I'll drag this into my comp and then right click and choose Transform, Fit to Comp Width. And I'll set the transfer mode to overlay, and then to hide the gaps, I'll use the track matte controls to set the background as its alpha matte. But then turn that back on. So we get a bit of texture going on. Padlock both these so we don't mess anything up later. To add art text, I'm going with 0 to 9, typed vertically, and I'm going to fill the available height of the comp. With the text tool, click and start typing 0, enter 1, enter 2, enter 3, and so on. Then I'm going to add an extra digit at the bottom. So I'm going to repeat the top text. This is going to help with line spacing. So that if I zoom in now, I'll position my text so it's at the top of the screen. And in fact, let's increase it a little bit in size. I'll position this so it's at the top of the screen. And I probably could do all this numerically, but sometimes it's easier just by eye. What I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the line spacing so that the top of the 0 is just off the bottom of the screen. I'll just do that by clicking and dragging right. There we go. Great. To the start, I'll hit enter and rename this to units. And I'll then drag it over to the 3rd column. And one tip is if I hold shift while doing so, I can't, and even if I move up and down, I can't really drag it vertically. I'm stuck to only dragging it in the one direction, unless I really pull like I was. So that's my units. I'll duplicate the layer, call it tens, drag it into the middle, and duplicate my layer again, and call it hundreds. Drag that one over for my 3rd column there. And obviously this can be whatever text you want, but that's the setup. Now we're ready to add some expressions. In this example, I'm using a copy of the layout, same principles, but I've got 10 random words in each column. For the first column, I'll go to Effect, Expression Controls, Slider Control. And I'll rename this to Word. I'll then go to Effect, Distort, Offset. Offset is a very useful effect because it lets you move a layer and fills in the gap with the bit that it's just moved off. So I'm going to hold Alt and click on the Shift Center to stopwatch. And in the expressions area, I'll type square brackets, value, square brackets, 0. We're creating 2D coordinates and saying use the existing value for the X property. Comma, and then I'll do value squares 1. That's the Y property. Plus, and I will pick whip the word slider value. Then times it by this comp dot height divided by 10. Wherever I set the whole digit, it will stop at one of my words. But I also want to line it up so that the top word corresponds to the middle of the comp. So that 0, if it was a set of numbers, would be in the middle, and then I could just directly translate. So what I'll do is I'll disable the offset for the moment, and just using the Y property, I'll just scroll down until the top word, in this case shivering, is right in the center. And then I'll re-enable. And I can set some keyframes. By using the offset effect, even if I enable it, we're not getting any motion blur. What I could do is go to Effect, Time, CC Force Motion Blur. We're getting something, but we've had to set some big numbers. So instead of CC Force Motion Blur, I'll disable that. Then I'll go to Effect, Blur and Sharpen, Directional Blur. And then I'm going to add this expression to the blur length. First, we get the current value of offset Y's value. Then we get the value for the previous frame. Time is the current time, and removing one frame from that gets us tprev, which we can then use with the value at time function to get the previous frame's offset Y value. Delta looks for a change in values, and math.floor rounds that down. Blur max gives us the maximum blur, and fade time, how many frames will transition from blur to no blur. Then, if delta is not 0, so that there is a change in the offset, we set the blur to blur max. But if delta is 0, we fade it out. And for some reason, this left me with an excess value of 150. Somehow it's connected to the fade time, but meh, it works. And this means you can set your word slider values to something manageable instead of having to set massive changes to get the same effect. But what if you want to have one set of keyframes drive all 3 columns? Full disclosure, this started as a solution posted over a decade ago by Dan Eberts. But I've added my own touch, making the 10s roll over as that change approaches rather than snapping. You think that's transformative use, right? First off, we need a slider to control all the change in values. I'll go to Layer, New, Null Object, and hit Enter and rename this to Control. Then I'll go to Effect, Expression Controls, Slider Control, and rename this to, I don't know, Distance or Count or whatever you want. Then on the Units layer, go to Effect, Distort, Offset. If you skip the previous chapter, then, well, offset is a really useful wrapping things around effect. And before we add any expressions, let's just set the offset's Y value to 1920, the height of the comp, so that the 0 is in the middle of the comp. I did this by eye on the previous part. Hold Alt and click on the Shift Center to stopwatch. And in the expressions area, type var x equals value square brackets 0, close squares, semicolon. New line, var offset equals, and pick whip the control slider. Then add percentage sign 10 semicolon new line. It is the modulus or remainder in JavaScript. Here's how it works. If you divide 55 by 10, then 10 goes into 55 5 times with 5 left over. So no matter what the slider is set to, only the unit of the slider will be used to determine where to offset the column. Next, type var y equals linear brackets offset 0, 10, this comp.height, 0, close bracket semicolon. Square brackets x, y plus value squares 1 and make sure all the squares are closed. Then we use linear as a range mapper, using the offset value as the driver. And finally, we set our array with x, then y plus the original value, so that the 0 lines up in the middle. The tens column is a little more complicated. And let's add the offset effect again. Set the shift center to 1920, and then open the expressions area. Var slider equals, and pick whip the distance slider, divided by 10 semicolon. Var my digit equals math.floor brackets slider, close bracket semicolon. Var decimal equals slider minus my digit semicolon. Var my val equals my digit. If decimal is greater than 0.8 and decimal is less than or equal to 1, close brackets, open curly brackets, my val equals my digit plus linear brackets decimal, 0.8, 1, 0, 1, close bracket semicolon, close curly brackets. Var mult equals math.floor brackets my digit divided by 10, close brackets, plus 1 semicolon. New line. Var y equals linear brackets my val, 0, 10 times mult, this layer.height times mult, 0, close brackets semicolon. Var x equals value square bracket 0, close squares semicolon, open square brackets x, y plus values open squares 1, close squares. Phew, there's a lot to unpack here. First, we identified the slider. Then we got the value of it as an integer, so 5.5 becomes 5, for example. Then we want the decimal for the slider, the 0.5. So if we have that, we can trigger a change every time that decimal reaches 1. But instead of triggering the change when it does, we can use the linear function to animate as the change approaches 1. But linear is a little odd and seems to only run once it is stored inside an if statement, certainly as far as After Effects is concerned. So if decimal is more than 0.8 but less than 1, add its value to the rounded number and set the controlling myVal variable to that. But then this only works for the first 0 to 10, after that the expression stalls out. So to trigger it to run between 10 and 20 and so on, we create another variable called mult, and this is used to increase the range for the linear y expression, both for the driving myVal variable and for the layer's height. And if I set some keyframes and play that back, you see we get this little nudge of the tens column just as the 0 column passes 9. Now let's copy the effect from the tens layer and paste it onto the hundreds, but edit the offset expression to divide the slider by 100 instead of 10. And you're done, at least with the expressions. Full project is linked in the description below, so use that to compare if your project isn't working. Also, post in the comments if you get stuck. In 2025, I'm pretty good at responding. In 2035, who knows? Hey, welcome back, chapter skippers. You didn't miss much. With our precomp selected, go to Composition, Open in Essential Graphics. And from the timeline, drag into the EG panel the counter from the control null. Now create a new composition, in my case 1920 by 1080. and add in our precomp. Next, go to Effect, Distort, Transform, and set the rotation to 90. We need to use the transform effect so that it happens before the next effect, which is found in Effect, Perspective, CC Cylinder, and expand its rotation. And set the rotation to -90. And set the render to outside. If you expand the layer on the timeline, you can now see the essential properties area where you can set the value of the count. And that's the mechanics. The rest is window dressing. I created a black solid, and then I added a mask where I wanted to see the dial. Then expanded the mask properties, set it to subtract, and feathered the mask in the Y direction. This created a smaller area to be visible and added little extra shading. Adding the stroke effect from Effect Generate, with set to mask 1 and a thicker line, gave me this outline. Finally, I made the solid a 3D layer and added a camera, all of which gives you this. So there you go. A deep dive into using expressions to drive an odometer with modulus, linear, and if statements. Does that count as advanced expressions?